webinar, Detecting the Bear in Camp, How to Find Your True Vulnerabilities. My name is Kelly Garofalo, and I'll be the moderator today. This webinar is part of Rapid 7 Security Summer Camp, so you can join us all summer long at rapid7.com/camp for more security learnings and webinars. This webinar will take about an hour, including time for your questions. We will record the session and send out the recording link to all of you in the next few days. You can ask questions at any time using the chat feature, and we will get to them at the end of the session. Next slide, please. As an attendee of this webcast, you are eligible for 1 CPE credit. You can self-report on your organization's website, for example, iscsquared.org, and we strongly recommend that you keep a copy of your webcast registration email in case you get audited. For detailed instructions on how to self-report, please visit bit.ly/r7cpe and note that the bit.ly code in the URL is case sensitive. And next slide, please. Finally, today's presenters are Jessica McAvoy, Senior Security Consultant at Rapid7, and Ryan Papa, Senior Manager of Product Management at Rapid7. So now over to you, Jessica.
Thank you, Kelly. So we were here to talk to you about finding your true vulnerabilities, but that's kind of boring, and it's the middle of the afternoon. So hopefully, while your caffeine is kicking in for the afternoon push, we'll wake you up with a story. Once upon a time, I worked for this company, little startup, and they decided that we were going to go on a company camping trip. And so the entire company gets this whole campground reserved out at Mount Rainier. We're up in Washington, and we've taken over. We have all the picnic benches and all the campsites, and we see scattered throughout the campground are these signs, caution, bear in area. And we thought, that's kind of scary, but I'm sure we'll be bear safe, so let's go at it and have some fun. So we get our campground set up, and we've got our food in our coolers, and we've got our dirty laundry hanging up from our hike because we were all kind of sweaty. We've got our picnic baskets, we've got our tents, and we're having some s'mores by the fire, and everything seemed to be great. Nighttime fell, and we went to go put everything away, and we thought, right, they said there were bears. We should probably pack up our food and put it in our tents so that we're safe. We wouldn't want those bears knocking over our coolers or anything. I watched Yogi Bear. I know they like picnic baskets. So we put everything in our tents, and we went to bed. And the next morning, I wake up to screams, and everyone is running, and there's just gore and blood and food everywhere, and there's this bear rummaging through our campsite. So I run down the hill, and I go and call the ranger, and, I barely escaped with my life, and everyone else in the company was killed in this tragic bear accident, and that's why I work for Rapid7 now, because I don't have a company anymore. Well, what went wrong? This would have been a more actionable message. We didn't know that bears like food in coolers. We didn't know that they could open coolers. We didn't know that our cleaning supplies and our dirty clothes and anything that was fragranced might have drawn the attention of the bears. We were really unaware of what to do about bears. This would have been a better message. This would have been a message that said, bears can get into our coolers. We need bear-resistant containers. We need bear boxes, or we need to hang our food from the trees. We need to put our food into a nice, safe, and rigid trailer that the bears can't get into. This is an actionable message. This would have saved everyone in my company, but then I wouldn't have gotten to work with these wonderful people, so it turned out that it was for the best anyway. Now, my VP told me that I should actually mention that that's not a true story. There was some question about that, apparently. I was very convincing. To be perfectly honest, the only encounter I've had with a bear, they rummaged through my vestibule and left me and the contents of my campsite fairly alone. So just so that everyone stops freaking out about bears, I didn't get eaten by a bear. But we do have bears in our environment. this is a great analogy to how we look at vulnerabilities in security. Nexpose finds the bears. It's going to tell us about bears. But we still need to do something about that message. We still need to make it actionable. So with Nexpose, we want to find and manage our bear problems. In the vulnerability management lifecycle, we've all seen something similar to this, I'm sure. We want to go through an iterative process. We use Nexpose to discover and categorize our assets. We prioritize these assets based on their risk. We assess, we use Nexpose to scan for vulnerabilities. This is actually looking at our campsite and saying, all right, we have 20 campsites and each one has a trash can and each one is going to need a bear container or a trailer for food. That's the assessment part. We're looking at the things that the bears would find attractive. Report will give us the ability to report out to management, administrators, and business owners. And then we're ultimately trying to drive remediation. And this is the part where traditionally our vulnerability management programs tend to fall a little short. We spend a lot of time over on this side of the loop. We spend a lot of time trying to make sure that we've scanned all the things and make sure that we've found all the vulnerabilities. But scanning all the things and finding all the vulnerabilities is just screaming about bears. We need to drive remediation, and then we need to verify that the patch has been applied. Some of the biggest questions that come up in vulnerability management are what is it and whose is it? This bear is very confused about what this thing is and who it belongs to. With Nexpose, we try and help you resolve these questions through a couple of mechanisms. First, the what is it? Nexpose is going to provide discovery scanning either as a standalone piece or integrated with all of your vulnerability scans. You can do network-based discovery, which is when we give Nexpose a site range, an asset range, and it will scan everything in that IP range. Or we can do dynamic discovery, leveraging mechanisms like VMware or AWS or DHCP, any of these dynamic connections that we have been moving towards to give us a better view of what's in our environment right now. If we don't have an authoritative source for assets that are coming on and off the network, then we still want to look at network-based discovery. But we're definitely moving towards more of a real-time, virtual-based network architecture. And if you are moving towards that, you can leverage our virtual discovery mechanisms to speed that up and detect systems as soon as they come onto the network. We also want to be able to give you the ability to parse these out and answer the question, whose is it? And we give you real context asset tagging for that. With real context asset tagging, we solve the age-old problem of security is the only group that knows about an asset. In a previous engagement, I was working for a large multinational retailer, and I was building their PCI environment. And as part of this engagement, I did vulnerability scans of most of their environment. Well, one of the boxes came back as a clear outlier, where most boxes were bad. You know, there were still some things with risk scores of 20, 30,000 per system. But this one system had the highest risk score I have ever seen in my life. It was over 100,000 on one system. So it was a very clear outlier, and it was really important that we addressed what this box was, who owns it, and get it off the network. So I had to go and call up the network guys. I said, okay, what does this IP address belong to? Where is this located? Can you tell me anything about it? And he goes, well, okay, it's in the UK headquarters. I said, great. Where? Whose is it? Well, I don't know. Go talk to the IT guys in the UK. So I talked to the IT guys in the UK, and they were like, okay, it's on this switch, and it is somewhere on the 4th floor in the southwest quadrant. So we find a network admin, and we send him out there with a link light, and he goes out office to office and port to port, switch to switch, trying to find this box. And so as he's going through and trying to find it, he comes back and he says, I can't find it. It's not anywhere, and it has to be on this switch. So it's like, all right, we'll go and open up the closets, pull up the carpet. Obviously, this port is running somewhere in that building, on that side of the building. Otherwise, we can't get cables over there. So he goes through it again, and finally he sends me this picture of a box sitting in the corner of a broom closet, covered in 6 inches of dust, blinking away, and says, I think I found your box. So I was like, okay, well, you've already got it unplugged. Leave it unplugged, see who screams. Well, this was about the 27th, 28th of the month, and that's relevant because it only took a day or so before the calls started coming in. And the calls, when help desk finally notified us, were saying, hey, the purchase order system in the UK is offline. Not good. So, of course, I worked with the director of finance, and I said, hey, you need to take responsibility for this box, and you need to get it remediated. And by remediated, I mean you need to encase this box in cement and drop it off a bridge. And that was great, and she said, yes, this is definitely a problem, and we're going to take ownership of it, and we're going to replace it, but it's going to take 6 months. And I said, okay, fine. 6 months is great. You just need to be aware that it's a problem. Unfortunately, I was on a contract. So how do I relay this information to the people coming in behind me, especially when they hadn't really built a team that was going to take over this effort? That team was still evolving. That team was still growing. I had no one to pass off this knowledge that was now recorded only in my head. In the past, this was an insurmountable problem. But today, with real context asset tagging, we can now add tags to a system that say, purchase order system, and the owner is the director of finance, and the location is the UK headquarters, 4th floor, southwest quadrant, broom closet. All of these can be added as tags with real context asset tagging. So now we have the ability to say not only what it is, but whose it is. We can discover what assets are on our environment, and we can parse them out to the appropriate individuals. The other question that we get a lot is being able to prioritize those assets. With this purchase order system, it was a relatively high criticality. It was a very bad state for that box to be in. But there are other boxes in our environment that might have equally high risk scores, but they're actually isolated. They're on a private network. I've seen old NT boxes that are still running time card systems. And while the time card system is somewhat critical, from a security perspective, it might not be that critical if it's isolated to its own network. If that's the only thing running on that network and it's completely isolated and it's just feeding this data back over some sort of back-end connection, maybe it's not so critical. With real context asset tagging, we can represent this criticality in the risk scores. We can weight our risk scores based on the criticality of an individual asset. And you can apply this asset tagging at the asset group level, at the individual asset, or at the site level. So a lot of ways that you can get very dynamic grouping. Now, with this, there are some great examples that make great use of this. Dynamic asset groups with a descriptive tag based on OS for Linux, Windows, and network systems. So a lot of us have been doing this already with our dynamic asset groups. We'll create OS contains Windows server is now our Windows servers. OS contains Windows and not server is our Windows desktops. OS contains AIX or HPUX or BSD or Solaris or Linux, that's our Linux or Unixy flavors. Now what we couldn't do before was combine these. We could not combine them to do that sort of OS tagging and a location, for example. So I could say AIX or HPUX or BSD or Solaris, but it was all or or and. There was no way to combine the two. So with this, we can now tag all of those OS ones that are Unixy. We can tag the location, and now I can make an asset group that says these are my Unix systems in the UK, and these are my Windows desktops in the US. So I can combine those with Boolean logic, so I have the OR for the OSs and the AND for the location. Another great application for this would be for working teams. When we have applications that are made up of very distinct systems, sometimes we've had to use static asset groups for those. Now we can simply apply individual tags to individual systems based on their ownership so that we can report out per owner. And we can combine those as working teams. We can tag for compliance and combine that with location. There's a lot of things that we can do with real context asset tagging. Another question that we get a lot is, what do you expect me to do with it? Just like with our camping story, we need actionable steps. I need to know what it is that you're telling me when you say, caution, there's bears in area. I need you to tell me that I have to put my food in a bear-safe container. I need you to tell me that, these have to go into the locked box. Nexpo's vulnerability scans can give an in-depth assessment of network systems and application level risks. They can give us very granular results, and they can give us scores that aid in prioritization and detailed remediation steps. So just like we saw, we can adjust those scores with our real context asset tagging. We can use that score to prioritize our remediation. Then we can give our IT administrators access into Nexpos based on their asset groups so that we can further give information on assets and vulnerabilities that are within their scope of responsibility. So before, where we had all of this information and all of this data and we were reporting it out and just passing it along and hoping someone did something with it, now I can give just my UK Windows administrators the UK Windows systems. I can give my Linux administrators in Texas just the Linux systems in Texas. So by basing their access on these asset groups, they're only going to see the assets that they are responsible for. And then they can drill down within those assets and see detailed remediation steps, CVE descriptions of vulnerabilities, exploit modules or malware that targets the vulnerability, and so on. Now, the biggest debate that I hear in every organization, and I will tell you, if I had $1 for every time someone told me this, we wouldn't be having this talk because I would be living on a private island. And that phrase is this: we can't patch Java because it breaks the app. And I pause because you're all probably putting your face in your palm just like I do every time I hear it. So many times this is written off as an exception. It's written off as we can't do this. It's not true. We can do that. There's just a different audience for it. We have to tailor our message for the audiences involved. This is not simply something that we can pass off one report and expect that it's going to get done. To get Java patched, we have to update our application. That means we either have to work with the developers or we have to use our business leadership to apply pressure to our vendors to update their application. Then, once the application is up to speed, we have to patch the server. So now the server can support that application running on the more current version of Java. Once the server is patched, then we have to patch the desktops. And if you try and achieve any of these individual steps apart from each other, you're going to get every single one of those administrators saying, I can't do that. I can't patch the desktop because then the users can't use the application. I can't patch the servers because it's going to break the app and the developers are going to come yell at me. In order to drive remediation, we have to be able to distribute not only results to the appropriate function, but we have to distribute appropriate results. We have to give different messages to different groups. A lot of times I see organizations have two main sets of reports in Nexpos. They have an executive report that goes out to their leadership and shows their core metrics and says, here's how many vulnerabilities we've found this month, or this is the percentage of improvement, this is how much we're showing remediation. I get a lot of groups have that dialed in. And then we have one report that goes to all of IT that has every single vulnerability that's associated with an IP. That is not the appropriate way to coordinate remediation. We need to send the desktop results to the desktop team. We need to send the server results to the server team. We need to loop in the developers because they're going to have to do work in order to support this effort. And we need to be able to give a summary of all of those individual pieces of work needing to be done to our business leadership at the director or VP level that has ownership over that application or ownership over those teams to coordinate and drive and prioritize that remediation. Otherwise, we're just screaming about bears. If we're just handing out vulnerability information to everybody and everybody's getting the same results, it's the same as posting a caution bears in area. So the bears are at your gate right now. The bears are waiting to get in, they see your food, and they want to eat it. When the Target breach, I'm sure we've all heard about this, was made public, I saw an interview with a security engineer who stated 2 months before the breach that an assessment was needed. He was telling his bosses, hey, I knew about this, and I told you we needed an assessment, and you didn't listen to me. Well, did he really not know that they needed an assessment? Because it sounds to me like he was doing an assessment. He was looking at vulnerability data. Something indicated to him that there were vulnerabilities in that environment. So did he really need an assessment? Or did he just need to know how to phrase that message better? Did they not know the risks? Or did they not know how to get leadership to care about them? Stop screaming about bears. Stop running up and down the halls going, bears! There's bears! No. We have to give actionable steps. We have to give actionable messages to all of the appropriate parties in order to drive bear fortification. The bears are at your gate, so what are you going to do to protect yourself? Whether you need help in implementing this in your next close deployment, which my team in Global Services handles, or if you need the help of our strategic services team to help build your program from the ground up, we're here with all the food storage containers, the bells, and the bear mace that you need to keep yourself out of the newspapers and off the front pages. And with that, I turn it over to Ryan. Ryan is going to help you do a little bit more with driving that remediation process.
Thanks, Jessica. As Jessica mentioned off the top, there are like a few major things that you need to take into consideration to help you drive it. So she talked a lot about actionability. One of the things that people really like to spend a lot of time on is when you ask them, what do you want to do with a vulnerability management program, the first thing a lot of people tend to say is, I want to be able to find vulnerabilities. And for the most part, that's not what people really want to do. What people really truly want to do is be able to remediate vulnerabilities. So Jessica mentioned this very often about actionability and communication with teams. So really the two keys to really making your overall vulnerability program a success is, number one, creating information that is actually actionable, and then number two, be able to communicate that outside of your organization. So how do you actually do this? Like, how do you actually go through the whole process of actually finding this out and actually getting this done? So there's really three major keys. The first one is you need to communicate. One of the biggest challenges, I'll spend a little bit of time, about a couple of minutes on this, but you really need to not only communicate within your own individual team, i.e. the person who's actually responsible for the program, but also with everyone else that you need to report to. So you have your remediation teams in IT, you have your auditors, you have your CISO, you have your full gamut of people that you need to actually respond to. How do you go about doing it in a way that actually makes sense? Next up is you need the ability to actually set goals for yourself. A lot of people run into this vicious cycle as I go scan everything, and then I go patch everything, and then I go scan everything again, and then I go patch everything again and go through this vicious, endless cycle. It's just a really difficult thing to get out of because it's very hard to prove that you are actually doing the right thing. And last but not least, once you actually set goals, be able to measure yourself on those goals. Are you actually being successful in what you need to do? Are you actually focusing on the right vulnerabilities, the right issues that are in play? And are you running as a fine, well-tuned machine to help you drive with what you need? So communication is the word. I've always told a lot of people that I think the key to a lot of vulnerability management programs is the people that you are responsible for and the communication with those people. And I'll explain a little bit, again, something a little bit in a minute, but communication is definitely key to helping you drive with what you need. Miscommunication, misunderstanding, not being able to drive information the way that people expect really hurts your ability as a vulnerability management practitioner to essentially get what you want done. And it could be something as simple as saying something to someone they just don't necessarily understand, or delivering information that is not in the way that they expect. And one of my favorite examples of this is what you see in front of you. So as a security practitioner on the right, I could go off and go fix the CVE. It's a high, this is a high, huge vulnerability that you need to go figure out. It's, we need to go patch our entire environment. It's in Splashdot. It's all the major press. We need to go figure this out. And the guy on the right, the guy who's responsible for remediation, the IT team is, all you really want me to do is go patch Adobe. IT teams don't care about security metrics. They don't care about things like CVEs. They don't care about things like CVSS scores. They don't necessarily care about what the description of the vulnerability is. They don't necessarily care about any of the things that security practitioners or even people like me care about. They care about getting the information that helps them take action and simplify their entire world. They don't necessarily need to go through a full process of, how bad is this? What does this actually affect? How do we need to actually think about what this actually works on? For the most part, you want to be able to give them information that helps them take, essentially hand information off to the rest of the food chain. They don't necessarily care about how risky it is. They want to be able to say to their practitioners and the people who are responsible for remediation, just go off and patch this thing and let me know when it will be done. Oftentimes there are cases where you need to actually dig a little bit deeper, but for the most part it's just tell me to go patch Adobe. I don't care about this full list of CVs that you've actually thrown at me. And secondly, you need to be able to give them the information all they need to know. Security personnel, it's really true not only in security but also to the rest of the world, is people like to give information. We love information. We love giving information. It makes us look like we're smart. It makes us look like we've actually spent a lot of time looking at what we try to do. But for the most part, it is what it is and how we want to drive it. So it's really important that when you're communicating both internally and externally that you give them the information and all they need to know. Don't give them 5,000-page reports with every single vulnerability and all the descriptions and all the individual references that drive it if all you're looking for that person to do is to remediate the 140 vulnerabilities that are within it. Or if you also don't want to, as Jessica talked a little bit about this in terms of real context and how you can break things out, don't give information to people that has no context in their world. So there's no point in handing a report on a Unix vulnerability to a team that's responsible for Windows. They don't care. It's a lot of noise. You lose all the credibility you lose all credibility in terms of how you want to drive it, but overall give people what they want in the way that they want to see it. So communication should be simple, and so this is a great example of our top remediations by risk report that is present within our Nexos. This is a very simple report that you can hand off to someone who's in the remediation side that tells them exactly what to do. At the top it says if you apply these 25 remediation steps, you'll remediate 57 vulnerabilities affecting 52,700 assets. This is great. If I was an IT practitioner, I don't necessarily have to know what the vulnerabilities are. I don't necessarily have to understand what risk means. I don't necessarily have to understand, overall what this sort of means from your security program side. I just need to know that the first thing, the highest thing I really need to do is go upgrade to the latest version of Adobe Flash Player on Windows, which is the thing you see at the top. It's simple, it's actionable, and it's key. This is a great way for you to help move your program forward and help you drive remediation tests as you drive through. Next up is that it's measurable. And I talked about this already a little bit, but you need to be able to measure your overall success and be able to prove to others that you're actually being successful. It's a really bad situation to be in where you just, as someone who gets dumped on information, you need to go do this, you need to go do this, you need to do this, you need to do this, without actually showing that you've actually done well. You want to be able to prove to the teams that you're talking to that you're able to show that what they've done has actually been successful and actually drive security success within their world. Remember, they're your partners too, because they're also the ones who are helping to drive what you have and where you need to be at. Next up, it needs to be actionable. You need to be able to do it in such a way where it seems like it is a process that is actually repeatable and something that they need to be able to do. Again, so if I was an IT practitioner, I just want to know what I need to go do next. Just give me the list and I'll go figure it out. And so being able to create a program which gives you the top 25 remediations in risk in order, which allows me to understand what I need to do and in which order, allows me not only to create an overall time frame plan around it instead of picking one-off vulnerabilities that are in a list somewhere, but allows me to assign information to the right people in the right way. So this gives you an overall idea of how you want to think about it, but also gives you a real plan and how you want to take action, and also allows you to decide how you want to do it. It's possible today I can only do the top 10, and that's okay. At least I create an actionable plan around that, and it's now owned by the IT practitioner to ensure that they actually do the right thing. Next up, it has to be repeatable. Do this on a regular cadence. So part of the reason for it to be measurable is you want to be able to drive success. So if you can do this in a repeatable process, it just becomes part of your overall workflow. You do it once in April, you do it once in May, you do it once in June, you do it once in July. You get into this regular cadence with the team where the team begins to expect what you're about to deliver to them, and they'll already know the information that's within the list because it will align to whatever you actually have. They should also be able, over time, you'll be able to see trends in terms of what comes through, so they can even start to plan before you even hand them that list, the things that may be on it because the things that actually come through overall. So if, as you know, every second Tuesday every month, both Adobe, Oracle, and Microsoft come out with your huge set of vulnerabilities. Creating a remediation report that drives it will allow them to understand how it affects their environment and what new things are actually there. Last but not least, it has to be targeted. As Jessica mentioned, you can drive things using action groups or real context or what we call tags and expos. You want to be able to target that information to the right people in the right way. So ensure that you handle the Windows vulnerabilities to the Windows team. You hand the Unix vulnerabilities to the Unix team. You had the Oracle vulnerabilities to the Oracle team, and so on and so on and so on. And then it allows you to not only give information the way that you understand, but you can now start measuring people against each other so you can see how well the Windows team is also managing against the Unix team. But it also allows you to separate information so that two people don't even know what they're necessarily doing or don't have to worry about finagling information out of a massive list to try to drive them with where they are. Next up, it's really, really key is you want to be able to set goals that matter. One of the biggest failings I see in a lot of security programs is that they never set goals for themselves. So they never understand what success means. And that's a really big challenge, not only for the security practitioner, but also for the person who's actually responsible for doing all the work. If I have no way to understand that I've actually done good things, then that is an overall problem overall. A good example of this is one of the famous examples I've had in one of the customers that I've worked with is month over month, the number of vulnerabilities went up. They went from some number, let's say 7, to another number 10. And they handed that information off to their boss. And their boss goes, you have failed. But they had gone through the whole process. They had 6 or 7 vulnerabilities that came out. The new 10 vulnerabilities that had come out afterwards were ones that came after they'd gone through the entire remediation process. But it was really difficult to give that collateral or prove that to anyone who would listen. It just looked like the vulnerability count went from 7 to 10, so you're much worse. Having your vulnerabilities go up or having your risk score go up or having the number of severe vulnerabilities go up or down is not necessarily a bad thing, depending on the goals that you want to set. And the goals that you're going to set are going to be completely different depending on the team that you're working with. For some organizations, depending on maturity, it might be to lower your overall risk score. For some, it might be to tackle 20% of all the high critical vulnerabilities that actually exist in your program. It could be to knock off 50% of all Windows vulnerabilities within a month time frame. It's up to you to understand where your biggest risks are, and a remediation report can help you do that, but also think about how you want to think of where you think your overall best bang for the buck is. Having trends go up, as I said, is not necessarily bad. And this is why. So I hear this all the time. For every vulnerability patch, 4 new ones come out. And it's just an endless efficient hamster wheel cycle. You just sit there, what I call the hamster wheel of death. Because you're always responsible for patching everything that comes through, it just feels like an endless stream of vulnerability that you'll never get out of. And since there's no goal, there's no metric, there's nothing that enables you to find success, whether it's through a KPI or some other goal that you have overall, you want to make sure that you drive it through for every vulnerability that you actually have. Ensure that the team is actually doing well. So you can do things by like labeling success. You can actually show them directly that they've actually done everything that they're supposed to do, even the new things that come out. Make them feel that their job isn't necessarily a push button patch and wait for something else to come out afterwards. They're always part of your team, and they're the ones you have to work with. Also, on top of that, you want to be able to show remediation progress, right? You want to be able to show over time what level of remediation that you have, how well you've actually done. You want to be able to assign it to individual people and be able to assign assignment dates. So here's a great example of an individual program that you can create where you can see something that says, I want to create a remediation project around high-risk Windows servers. I want to be able to assign that to the server team who's responsible for it, and then set an assignment date. Show progress, and also be able to actually share that information with the rest of the team that actually exists there. And again, success can be big or small. I mean, there's nothing, and there's a lot, like for example, if you go through the whole process of patching all of Heartbleed within a month, that's great. It's a small thing. Depending on how you think about it, you're not necessarily moving the needle that far. But any incremental progress is good. Any improvement to your overall security program is good, even if the results aren't necessarily there to back it up. If you're there and you have a process in which you're understanding what's the most important, as Jessica mentioned, if you're able to show people what the most important thing to do next, whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, or 9 months down the road is, understanding what that is and building that around, it's okay. If it's either big, that you actually hit the big home run, or if it's something small or incremental. As I said, the overall success for a security program will help you drive it overall. In addition, you want to be able to measure and contrast. This is one of my favorite things because a lot of people are really hesitant to do this. But you want to be able to measure your different individual teams, programs, or remediation teams against each other. And there's different ways that you can do this. Like, for example, you could do this based on application. So you can say all the Windows Server team should be against the Windows Desktop team versus the Unix, Unix Server team. And you want to be able to measure their overall success in your security program against each other and then display that to everyone else. A good example of how we do that within the product is what we call the risk report card. You want to be able to define a measurement standard. So talking a little bit about how we were thinking about success 5 minutes ago, come up with a measurement standard that is easy to measure that you can compare people against. This is a great example of how you can use the A to F scoring system within our site report card and Expos to measure a group of things. In this case, it's a list of Windows admin sites, and they're a C. But you want to be able to prove to people that they're actually getting better and see how bad they are against everyone else. This allows you to do 2 things. Number one, it allows you to present visibility on how well and how you're doing overall holistically in a security program across your various teams. But in addition, it also helps you understand where you may need to invest, not necessarily from a security perspective, but also from a training perspective. So if you see one team just not doing the right work, is it because they are just overloaded with the amount of work that they have to do and they're not able to get around to the remediation steps, so you need more personnel? Or do they just not care, and that is a different conversation you can either have with your boss or raise it up with theirs as well? I mean, that's always a little bit of a difficult conversation, but it gives you visibility into that world. We've also found that by what we call gamifying the process a little bit, by actually measuring people against each other, people don't necessarily like, people respond to seeing that they're worse than everyone else. No one wants to be the guy who's in last. Last but not least, once you do all these things, it's going to become an overall success. It won't be necessarily perfect. There will be things that you'll have to work through, but by defining those 3 different things in order, communication, actionability, and also reporting, it allows you to drive where you are, what you have, and where you need to be in the future. In the end, you'll be an overall level of success. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions?
Yes, we do have a few questions. The first one is on the remediation progress screenshot you just showed. What is that program? Is that an Expos feature or a Rapid7 add-on or something else?
It is neither actually right now. It is a screenshot of something that we've actually developed for someone to, it's something that we've actually used to demo how that actually might work. It is not a program that we actually become, but it's an idea in terms of how we think it would be great to create actionability and drive it forward overall.
All right, thank you. And a question we got earlier during Jessica's talk, can we auto-apply criticality level based on a tag in Expos? And Jessica, you may be on mute.
I provided an answer in the chat, but I did answer in chat, but I can also say it for everyone's benefit. The criticality level is a tag in and of itself. So you can apply the tag in the same ways that you can apply something else, which is individually to an asset as the result of a filtered asset search, to an asset group, or to a site. So if you already have a tag that your assets are tagged with, and things that are corresponding to that tag should also have the criticality tag that's appropriate to that, what I would do would be to create an asset group based on that first tag, or just do a filtered asset search based on that first tag using the criteria of contains this tag, and then save the results of that filtered search or save that as an asset group with the criticality tag applied to it. So you can apply it to an existing tag. It's just a little bit of a workaround.
All right, thank you. Our next question, probably one that each of you could take a turn answering. One thing I've always been asked is, do you concentrate on a vulnerability that affects a large number of servers or a higher vulnerability that affects a small number of servers?
I'll go first if you don't mind, Jessica.
I'm sorry. Can we repeat the question once?
Yes, of course. This person is always asked, do you usually concentrate on a vulnerability that affects a large number of servers or a higher vulnerability affecting a smaller number of servers?
So I'll answer that question first, and Jessica, this is more of an opinion question than anything, but I'll give you how I think about the world, and Jessica, you can follow if you disagree or agree. It depends. And this is always a fun little answer. There's always vulnerabilities that are low risk that may affect all your overall world, and for the most part, if it's a small vulnerability that has a risk score of like 10, or a CVS score of 1 that affects all your servers, it's probably less important than a high-risk vulnerability that affects 10% of your servers. This is why, as you go through a real context and as you build out filtering throughout your world, providing context to your world in terms of what's not only important from a vulnerability perspective, but also from an asset perspective to help you understand what's really, truly important in your world will help you drive that decision. There's no black or white answer for that question. It really depends on your world and what's important to you.
And I think I agree mostly. It is very much an opinion question. I generally find that going by the real risk score is the best prioritization for me for that. I apply the criticality weightings so that the more critical systems will bubble up, and then I use the top remediations report by risk, by real risk score to prioritize those remediations. So sometimes it is going to be a patch that has the most impact to a large number of systems, even though it wasn't going to be a super high criticality vulnerability in and of itself. Sometimes it might just be a one-off if if that one-off happens to have a really high risk score.
All right, thank you. Our next question, is there an easy way to find out how many new vulnerabilities come out in a period, whether it's a year or a month?
For clarification on the question, are you looking for new vulnerabilities that affect your environment or new vulnerabilities in general?
It doesn't say. It may be in general, because they also said, or a known expected rate of growth in the vulnerability library.
So I'll answer the question in general, and if the person who asked the question wants clarification offline, we can always answer it offline as well. In general, there's many ways in Expose to show what we actually have. We release, obviously, releases on a regular cadence, which you can take a look at our news items, which will show every single vulnerability that we have included as part of the product, and that may affect you. If you want a different answer, or you're asking about a very focused in terms of what happens in your environment, let's take that offline.
All right, thanks. So earlier during Ryan's presentation, your screen showed the critical Windows servers that were authenticated. How do you confirm with Nexpose an asset was successfully authenticated versus an asset that was scanned that failed to authenticate?
Sure. So we actually have that information stored within our SQL data model, so you can actually pull that information out of our, you can create it as essentially a SQL query report that will pull that information out, which will tell you on a per protocol basis whether or not your request was, or your authentication request actually succeeded or not against the asset. There are different ways that you can get around that, and there's also a report in the reports page on the community which gives another way to pull that information. So if you can run that report against your site or your asset group, show you which assets were credentialed and not.
And I just also like to add to that when you're looking at an individual asset, we're looking at the certainty level that is in the fingerprints that will indicate whether or not it was credentialed. You'll frequently see a certainty of 0.85 if it was able to authenticate but with less than administrative credentials, and you'll see a certainty of 1 pretty much only when it is going to have authenticated with an administrative credential. So besides running the report where you can find all of the systems that either have or have not authenticated, you can also look at those fingerprint listings on an individual asset to see if that individual asset had authenticated and how we determined what that asset was.
All right. Our next question, I know you mentioned one can take advantage of dynamic discovery. So they are wondering, can Nextcode scan the actual virtual machine host, such as an ESXi server?
Absolutely. We have a really great integration with the NSX functionality on VMware, which will allow you to scan through the fabric of the host server. So it's not actually going to do any network-based scanning for that server. Ryan, did you have anything to add to that?
Sure. So Jessica described our NSX integration, but we also have an ESXi integration as well, also through dynamic discovery, which will allow you to essentially scan based on new virtual assets to come online. It is what we did prior to our integration with NSX, but not everyone has NSX yet or deployed. So that still exists, and you're able to essentially pull new assets that come on and off based on what it is, and then essentially create rules around that to run scans.
Okay. Our next question, what is the difference between an authentication scan and a non-authentication scan?
So an authenticated scan is going to give you all of the results that you would not have been able to get on a network-based scan. So typically, when we're doing an unauthenticated scan and you're scanning across the network, you're looking for open ports and services that are going to be responding to the traffic that's sent out from the scanner. In order to scan for vulnerabilities, we are only able to look at those services that are being offered along the network. So we're looking for remote vulnerabilities only. On the other hand, when we are able to do authenticated scans, we can now see all of the services and applications that are running on a box, so we can get those client-side vulnerabilities, which are actually one of the biggest vulnerabilities in our environment. Client-side vulnerabilities are going to be the cornerstone of social engineering attacks, and your weakest link is your users. So if they have exploitable software on their desktop, such as an outdated browser or a old version of Adobe or Flash or Java, all these client-side vulnerabilities, all it takes is one of your users clicking one malicious link, and you can have an attacker with a shell right into the core of your systems. So it's definitely a good idea to be able to get that sort of information. Also, system configuration, database configuration, registry settings, any of those things that you would get either from our more in-depth vulnerability checks or from our policy scans, those are only accessible with authentication. So it basically gives us the ability to look at everything on the box rather than just what's available on the network to your average listener.
All right, thank you. Our next question. I have two groups mediating our servers. One focuses on platform support and the other is focused on application and database support. Do you have any recommendations on how to split the vulnerability remediation report so each group only sees what they're responsible for?
Sure. There's different ways that you can do it. We have a concept within Expose called vulnerability categories, which is essentially a grouping of like vulnerabilities that you can drive together. So depending on what is responsible on the platform side and what's responsible on the application side, you might be able to delineate that way. Other than that, it really depends on what's owned by them. There are different options in play that may or may not work. I think it would be great to ask that. I'd love to take that as an offline, depending on what your needs are. But you can take a look at vulnerability categories first to see if that meets your needs, and then you can filter and group any report that you have based on those categories.
All right, great.
And just to expand on what Ryan said, from the application side of that, a lot of times you'll notice that you can filter the report, the scope, by sites or asset groups or tags, and a lot of folks don't notice the button next to it that says vulnerability filters have been applied. When you click that, you'll get to see that place where you can search and filter for those vulnerability categories. So it's just that button off to the right that says vulnerability filters have been applied, usually with many of our report templates.
Okay, perfect. Our next question. Sometimes IT needs to contribute to performing a risk assessment for a vulnerability. In that case, some of the security details need to be shared with IT to support a joint analysis effort. Do you have any advice for this situation?
Sure. So I consider those. The requirements and the information I gave you is going to be completely different depending on who you're talking to and the situation that you're in. If there is a requirement or if IT needs to be involved in the process and they need to see the information, then albeit show them the information that they need. If they need to see all of it, again, you can show them all that information. It's not necessarily a requirement that you need to hide everything for them. It's just that we've seen, depending on the maturity of an organization, also depending on the ability of the IT team to understand what's going on, and also their ability to consume that information, that it's often best to start them off with as little as possible and then give them the information in increments. So it depends. Some organizations want to see everything, some don't. It's really dependent on each world.
All right, thank you.
Exactly as Ryan said.
Yeah.
I have
go ahead.
just one comment. I very rarely get someone who says, you know, my organization isn't giving me enough information. Almost every organization I've done deployments for, the teams are saying, I am getting too much information, and the signal-to-noise ratio is very poor. So being able to give them filtered results simply helps them to hone in and focus their attention. Sometimes we do need to give them more than one asset group. We can give people multiple asset groups, but use those asset groups as a way to group and categorize systems so that they're not overwhelmed and they can look at just one group of systems, just the results of one filtered criteria, and still have access to all the systems, but in a way that's easier to digest.
Okay, thank you. Next question. If there are vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 0, do we really need to remediate those? How do you suggest we handle them?
Again, this is going to become a theme in my answer is it really depends. If you have 5,000 vulnerabilities in your organization, including a lot of high-risk ones, then the 0.0 ones should be way down your list. I'm a bigger proponent of risk score because it's something that we actually present, but if you want to use CVSS, you can as well. If you're at a position where you have nothing else but risk scores of 0.0, then it becomes a what do you want to do? We are recommending, because we are actually filing as a vulnerability, something that you should actually take into consideration, but since the risk is either 0 or minimal, that is a trade-off that you should make on your own. But if you have a whole bunch of other vulnerabilities that you need to patch as well that are much higher, I wouldn't worry about those first.
And I think it should also be noted that not every vulnerability has a CVSS score. There are many vulnerabilities that predate CVSS or that are more of a configuration issue and were never assigned a CVSS score, but are still fairly critical vulnerabilities within your environment. So while we'll try and translate that to a CVSS score, you might not find that it has the CVSS metrics and the CVE references that every normal modern vulnerability would have, but it could still be important, and it might even be more higher risk score because it is an outdated vulnerability or something very critical.
Okay, thank you. Our next question is long. I will edit it a little bit to make it more manageable. We seem to run into rocky terrain when we pass off actionable information to teams, and the info often contains tailored recommendations, whether patch, upgrade, check config, etc. And the engineers still are not sure what to do with the information. So what should the level of involvement on the part of security teams be in assisting engineers with understanding the information and then implementing changes? Is it watching and directing over their shoulder? Is that acceptable, or is there something else you should be doing when engineers aren't sure what action to take?
Well, so to me, this is a very interesting paradigm. In that oftentimes the security team can often make a recommendation. It could be a recommendation that comes out of our tool set, for example, and the expectation might be that the IT team will know what to do. Sometimes they'll ask you, as a security practitioner, what the best result will be. And depending on who you are in an organization and what your background is, you may be comfortable in giving those recommendations. But oftentimes, if you have 3 or 4 things in a list of possible remediations to drive, I would state that it's probably not, depending on the organization, it's not your place to recommend the best one, because there's 2 reasons for it. Number one is you don't want to be in a position where a decision that you make or you're standing over someone says you need to do this burns you or bites you in the future. And then number 2, you may not know, because you're not the IT practitioner, you don't understand the network as best as you can, or compared to someone who might be in an IT position, was the right thing to do. What I usually like to do when I was in this position quite a while ago at this time, I would ask for more clarification in terms of what other information they need to help them make the decision. And I either may or may not have it, depending on the situation that is, but I usually wasn't standing over their head telling them to go do something or giving them what they need. I usually ask for more information from my end to help them try that through. Jessica, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually disagree with you on this one, and I'll tell you why. When I find that in the role of a security analyst or in the role of a security engineer, we're expected to wear a lot of different hats. And one of the focuses that I put on my Nexpose deployments are trying to automate as much of the Nexpose process so that you're freed up to handle things like that. Because there's no reason that in security we should be spending all of our day tuning a SIM or tuning a vulnerability scanner or running scans manually or managing things in Nexpose. In fact, if you are spending time in Nexpose and that time is not at an individual asset level or at an individual asset group level, then you're probably not set up optimally. And the reason I focus on doing that in as automated a fashion as it can be is because I do think that it's our responsibility in security to find alternate measures. There are going to be vulnerabilities that can't be remediated. There is a legitimate business need. There are, legitimate business use cases for it, or our vendors are not being held contractually to be patching their things. Whatever the case may be, there will absolutely be things where IT is going to need help finding the best path that's available to them. Red Hat patches, people will tell us we can't roll our own for executable. We have to use an RPM. So what do we do in these cases? I think that as a security administrator or as a security engineer, it is our responsibility to do the research, to find out all of the options, and to understand enough about our environment that we can be a trusted advisor where we're not dictating, but we're working with the team and trying to find a solution that meets our business need and still provides some measure of security.
All right. With that, we are at the end of the hour. We got tons of questions and couldn't get to them all, so I'm sorry if we weren't able to get to yours. You can always reach out to info@rapid7.com if you have more questions for our team. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, of course, to Jessica and Ryan for sharing all of this information. And remember, you can see more presentations related to this one at rapid7.com/camp all summer long. So thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.